The champagne flute in Sofia Reyes's hand trembled, though she forced her grip to stay steady. Tiny bubbles rose and burst against the crystal rim, their lightness mocking the heaviness pressing down on her chest. The text still glowed on her phone screen. Funding withdrawn. Sorry, kid. These things happen in business. 12 words had undone 3 years of sketches, sleepless nights, and sacrifices she hadn't thought twice about making. Her dream of launching a sustainable fashion line had been stolen with the swipe of her partner's thumb. She stood at the edge of the rooftop bar, 40 stories above Manhattan. The wind curled through her dark hair and carried the noise of the city below like a restless tide. Neon lights blurred into streaks against her tear-glossed vision, the skyline looking less like promise and more like punishment. She tipped back the last of the champagne, the taste bitter now, sharp with disappointment. A voice broke into her solitude, low and warm like aged bourbon. Either that's your first glass or your last. No one savors good champagne like it's medicine. Sophia stiffened. She turned, rehearsing a cutting remark in her mind, but the words caught before they left her tongue. The man before her was striking in a way that demanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored charcoal suit molded to him as though it had been stitched on his body. He radiated the kind of confidence reserved for men who had never once been told no. His eyes, piercing blue and assessing, rested on her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I didn't realize my drinking technique was being evaluated, she replied, raising an eyebrow as she masked the ache inside with sarcasm. A spark of amusement flickered in his gaze. I evaluate everything. He extended his hand. Julian Hartley. The name carried weight, and even in her current haze, it rang familiar. Hartley Enterprises, real estate mogul, ruthless negotiator, the kind of man the financial pages wrote about with equal parts awe and resentment. His palm was warm against hers, the brief contact sparking an unwelcome current up her arm. She withdrew too quickly, unsettled by her body's betrayal. Sofia Reyes, she said, her voice cooler than she felt, and I'm not looking for company. Excellent, he answered smoothly, signaling the bartender. Neither am I. I'm looking for distraction. He slid a fresh glass toward her, his fingers brushing hers with deliberate ease. Despite herself, Sophia let a smile tug at her lips. That's remarkably honest. I find honesty saves time. He studied her carefully, as though cataloging the details others missed. Bad day or bad year? She considered deflecting, but something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than polite filler, made her answer. Both. My investor just pulled out of my startup. 3 years of work, gone in a single message. Fashion, yes? His gaze swept her dress, lingering not with predatory intent, but with a craftsman's eye. The asymmetrical collar, the architectural seamwork, that's your design. Sophia blinked, startled. Few men noticed such details. Yes, how did you? My mother owned couture houses in Paris and Milan. I grew up with sketch pads and fabric swatches scattered across the floor. He leaned casually against the railing, their shoulders nearly touching now. What's your brand vision? And for the first time that night, she spoke without rehearsed defenses. She told him about sustainable fabrics, about designing for women who wanted strength and elegance rather than empty glamour. He listened, not with the vacant nods she was used to, but with pointed questions that challenged her assumptions, pushed her to articulate what no one else had bothered to ask. Time dissolved, an hour became 2, then 3. The rooftop emptied, the city breeze cooled her bare shoulders, and before she realized it, his jacket was draped around her frame, carrying his warmth and faint sandalwood scent. I should go, she said softly, though every part of her resisted. Or, he countered, voice dropping, eyes locked on hers. We could continue this conversation somewhere more private. Her heart thundered. Business, she told herself, networking with a man who could change everything. But the lie cracked under the heat sparking between them. She met his gaze and surprised herself with the words that followed. Your place or mine? Mine is closer. His smile was triumphant, yet touched with something almost grateful.
as if he hadn't been sure she'd say yes. The elevator ride to his penthouse was silent, electric with anticipation. By the time the doors slid open to reveal a panorama of the glittering skyline, her pulse had already decided for her. Julian Hartley stood before her not as a name in the financial pages, but as a man whose kiss promised danger, escape, and the possibility of a night that would change everything. And when her hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath his immaculate shirt, Sophia knew there was no turning back. Dawn slipped across the Manhattan skyline in pale strokes of pink and gold, seeping through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Hartley's penthouse. The city below stirred with its usual rhythm, but inside the vast apartment the silence was heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of sheets. Julian reached for the warmth that had pressed against him through the night and felt only cool linen. His eyes opened to emptiness. The woman who had unsettled his careful control was gone without a trace. Sophia Reyes pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down the quiet street, heels clicking against the pavement. The A where was crisp, her head still dizzy with the aftershocks of choices she could barely process. She told herself it had been necessary to leave before sunrise, to let it remain a fantasy sealed within one night. Anything else risked entanglement with a man whose world would consume hers. She repeated that thought like armor, though her heart beat with confusing defiance. Back in his penthouse, Julian sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, jaw tight. He was not a man accustomed to absence. People didn't leave him. He was the one who ended things, who dictated terms, who set the rhythm of every encounter. Yet Sophia had walked away without a word. Her scent lingered on the pillow, and instead of closure, it sparked questions. Who exactly was she? Why did he care? Sophia returned to her Brooklyn apartment, a space far removed from Julian's world of glass towers and endless resources. The walls of her studio were lined with sketches and fabric scraps, proof of years of relentless work, but today her designs looked like fragile dreams. Her phone buzzed with a reminder from her landlord about overdue rent. Reality hit with cruel clarity. One night of passion hadn't erased the fact that her business was unraveling. She threw herself into work, drowning doubt with the comfort of routine. Yet memory betrayed her. She felt his hands against her skin when she reached for scissors. She heard his laugh when she pinned fabric to her dress form. The man had imprinted himself on her senses in a way she hadn't anticipated. Julian, meanwhile, instructed his assistant to quietly track down information. Sophia Reyes was not on social media, not in society columns. All he uncovered was a modest boutique lease and a small loan connected to her name. That mystery only deepened his fascination. He told himself it was curiosity, an itch to be scratched, but beneath that calculation stirred something rarer, a pull that unsettled him more than any corporate battle.
2 weeks later, Sophia sat trembling on the edge of her bathtub, staring at the impossible. 3 pregnancy tests lay before her, each marked with undeniable double lines. She pressed her palm to her still flat stomach as disbelief fought with terror. A life was beginning inside her, not 1 life but 3, as she would later discover. Her vision blurred with tears. She whispered into the small bathroom, as though the tiles themselves could hear. Just you and me now, little one. We'll figure this out somehow. Across the city, Julian stared out from his office tower, empire stretching beneath him, yet distracted by the memory of a woman who had vanished before dawn. He didn't know that her absence was about to collide with his life in ways even he couldn't control. A storm of secrets and revelations gathered just beyond the horizon, promising that their night together was only the beginning. Autumn rain lashed against the narrow windows of Sophia's Brooklyn apartment as she sat hunched over her sewing machine, the low hum fighting to drown out the storm inside her mind. Weeks had passed since she had seen Julian Hartley. Weeks since the night that had changed everything. The truth she carried pressed heavier each day, though her body gave little sign beyond the fatigue in her bones. She had been cautious her entire life, disciplined in ways most people her age never were, but one night of reckless surrender had rewritten her future. The memory of Julian's touch was tangled now with the sound of 3 tiny heartbeats that had echoed through the ultrasound room and left her frozen in awe and terror. The doctor's voice still echoed in her head, explaining how rare it was for 3 separate embryos to take root at once. Triplets. The word had seemed too large, too heavy for the cramped room, and for her already fragile circumstances, while others might have called it a miracle. To Sophia, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind rushing against her back, no ground in sight. Yet when she looked at the blurry black and white images in her hands, she felt an unfamiliar tenderness that startled her. She whispered their names before they were even born, words carried only by the sound of rain. Julian's world was moving with the same precision it always had, acquisitions stacking like polished stones, investors bowing to his calculated brilliance. Yet beneath the surface, cracks had begun to spread. He found himself staring too long at the empty side of his bed, remembering the woman who had walked away without hesitation. His assistant noticed his distraction when his answers came late in meetings, or his gaze drifted to the skyline as though searching for something lost. For a man who prided himself on control, the memory of Sophia had become an inconvenient weakness he could not shake. One evening, as Sophia closed the boutique she had fought to keep alive, a black town car slowed at the curb. Her heart hammered as she glimpsed the silhouette of the man she thought she had escaped. Julian stepped into the soft glow of the streetlight, rain clinging to his suit, his expression unreadable. He hadn't tracked her down for pleasure, not tonight. In his hand was a file from the Summit Holdings acquisition, her name stamped across a lease he now owned. Their worlds had collided again through brutal business rather than fate. Sophia froze in the doorway, one child asleep inside her and 2 more stirring faintly as though already sensing danger. Julian's piercing blue eyes swept over her face, and for the first time his armor cracked. He saw the truth written across her silence, the subtle changes in her body, the guarded way she shielded herself. He stepped closer, his voice lower than she had ever heard. "They are mine, aren't they?" The storm outside raged, thunder rolling through the streets, but nothing was louder than the silence that followed his question. Sophia clutched the doorframe, every instinct screaming to deny him, to protect the fragile world she had built. But the eyes that stared into hers were the same ones that had haunted her dreams, and now looked back at her in the ultrasound photographs. The truth could no longer remain hidden. Their night together had not been an ending. It was only the spark of a fire that threatened to consume everything she thought she could control. The boutique's air felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in around Sophia as Julian's question lingered between them. His presence filled the room like a storm about to break, every inch of his tall frame charged with tension. She tightened her grip on the counter, her pulse racing so fast she could barely hear the rain still battering against the street outside. The triplets shifted within her as if responding to the confrontation, a reminder that the truth could no longer remain buried. Julian stepped closer, the intensity in his eyes stripping away her defenses. He was no longer the charming stranger from the rooftop, no longer the ruthless mogul gracing magazine covers. He was a man staring at the possibility of something he had never expected, and the raw emotion on his face unsettled her more than his power ever could. His voice dropped, sharp and certain. "You disappeared without a word. You left me with nothing but questions. And now you stand here, carrying something that belongs to both of us." Sophia's breath caught at his words. Belongs. The word sliced through her fear and pride, igniting a fire of defiance in her chest. "These children aren't property, Julian. They're not pawns in some corporate deal you can acquire. They're mine because I chose to keep them when it would have been easier to walk away. I've built this life brick by fragile brick, and you don't get to storm in and claim it." For a moment, silence reigned. Julian's jaw flexed as he struggled with emotions he wasn't accustomed to revealing. Anger, yes, but beneath it something deeper flickered, almost like hurt. He moved toward the display window, staring out at the wet streets, his reflection fractured by raindrops. "You think I wouldn't have wanted them," he said quietly, more to the glass than to her. "You think I'm incapable of being more than the man who makes deals and builds towers." Sophia's voice trembled but didn't break. "I think you're a man who thrives on control, and these children don't come with contracts or guarantees. They need more than your wealth or your name."
They need patience, tenderness, consistency. She hesitated before adding the words that twisted like thorns inside her. Things I'm not sure you can give. Julian turned back to her, eyes blazing. You robbed me of the chance to try. Do you understand that I missed their first heartbeat, their first flutter of life, because you decided I wouldn't measure up? His words struck her like blows, each one fueled by the ache of absence he had only just discovered. For a man who commanded empires, the knowledge that 3 small lives had existed without him left him unmoored. Before Sophia could respond, the sound of small feet echoed from the apartment above. Her Uncle Marcus's voice drifted down, warning but too late. The triplets tumbled halfway down the narrow staircase, curious eyes wide as they spotted the stranger below. Nathan clutched a toy car, Lucas held his sister's hand protectively, and Mia's gaze locked instantly on Julian. 3 pairs of cobalt blue eyes, identical to his own, froze him in place.
Julian's breath faltered, his composure shattering. He sank to one knee instinctively, lowering himself to their level as though gravity itself demanded it. "Hello," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way Sophia had never heard. "My name is Julian." The children studied him with disarming innocence, and Lucas tilted his head with fearless curiosity. "Are you staying for dinner?" Sophia's heart thudded painfully as Julian looked up at her, his expression raw with something far more dangerous than anger. Recognition, longing, a desperate claim he couldn't yet put into words. In that charged moment she realized their fragile world had shifted forever. What had begun as one night on a rooftop was unraveling into a reckoning neither of them could escape. The line between protection and betrayal blurred, and the battle for their children's future had only just begun. The children's laughter lingered in the air long after Marcus guided them back upstairs, leaving Sophia and Julian facing one another in the cramped living space that suddenly felt like an arena. The fragile truce of dinner invitations and small smiles had been shattered by the raw truth of recognition. Julian's expression had hardened into something unreadable, but his eyes carried the storm. He had seen himself reflected in 3 pairs of innocent eyes, and there was no undoing that revelation. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice low but unyielding. "Not as adversaries, not as strangers who shared one night, but as parents. You had no right to decide this for both of us." Sophia braced herself, every muscle tight. "I had every right. I was the one who faced the ultrasound alone. I was the one who lay awake at night wondering if I could survive carrying 3 children at once. You weren't there, Julian. You didn't even know I existed beyond a single night." His jaw clenched. "Because you never gave me the chance." Her hand trembled as she reached for the back of a chair, grounding herself. "What would you have done if I had come to you then? A billionaire engaged to someone else, a man I barely knew. Would you have believed me? Would you have welcomed them, or would you have accused me of trapping you?" Julian flinched at her words because they mirrored the suspicion he knew would have lived inside him. He had been raised in a world where every alliance carried a price, every connection a strategy. His silence was all the answer she needed. Sophia moved toward the window, rain streaking the glass in jagged lines. "I chose what was best for them. Stability, love, a life free from being pawns in a man's empire." Julian followed her, his reflection looming beside hers. "You call it stability. I call it theft. I have missed 3 years of their lives. First words, first steps, birthdays. Do you understand what that feels like? To look into their eyes and realize everything has happened without you." The crack in his voice startled her more than his anger. For the first time, she saw not the impenetrable mogul, but a man grieving something he hadn't known was his to lose. The tension broke when Lucas's voice called faintly from upstairs. "Mommy, can he read us a story?" Julian froze, the words slicing through his fury. He looked at Sophia, searching for permission. Sophia hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect, to push him away, but the image of 3 little faces waiting expectantly tugged harder than her fear. She nodded once, curt and reluctant. Julian climbed the stairs with careful steps as though approaching sacred ground. Sophia followed silently, her heart pounding as she watched him settle awkwardly onto the small rug between the triplets' beds. Nathan pressed a book into his hands, Mia curled close to his side without hesitation, and Lucas studied him with wary excitement. Julian opened the book, his voice steady but softer than she had ever heard it, filling the room with words meant for children, but carrying a weight far greater.
Sophia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed tightly, watching a man she barely trusted win the attention of the three people she loved most. The storm between them had only grown fiercer, but as she watched Julian's large hand steady the pages for small fingers to turn, she felt the first flicker of a dangerous thought. What if he truly wanted this? What if he wasn't the enemy, but the missing piece she had fought so hard to deny? That night, as the children drifted into sleep, Julian closed the book and looked up at Sophia across the dim glow of the room. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. I'm not walking away again. Whether you fight me or not, I'm staying. Sophia's chest tightened. She didn't answer, but in the silence their battle lines blurred, replaced by something far more treacherous. Hope. Julian's words echoed long after the children's soft breaths filled the room. I'm not walking away again. Sophia stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of his vow pressing against every fragile wall she had built. She closed the door gently and led him back downstairs, the air between them sharp with unspoken tension. The boutique below felt different now, like the scene of a battle that had only just begun. He placed both hands on the counter, his posture that of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals but now stood on unsteady ground. I've spoken with my attorneys, he said, voice low and deliberate. Their advice is clear. I could pursue custody. I could challenge every choice you've made. His eyes found hers, piercing, relentless. But I don't want a war. I want a family. Sophia's pulse stumbled. A family. The word carried both promise and threat. And how exactly do you imagine that happening, marriage? He didn't flinch. Yes. The sound of it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Marriage. The word wasn't cloaked in romance or hope. It fell from his mouth lit. Kiss strategy. You think you can erase 3 years of absence with a contract? She stepped closer, fury trembling beneath her calm voice. You think a ring and your last name make up for the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I'd raise 3 children alone? Julian's jaw tightened, but for the first time she saw more than steel behind his eyes. I think a ring gives them legitimacy in a world that will judge them. I think my name shields them from whispers. And I think standing beside you, even if you hate me for it, is better than watching them grow up calling another man father. The rawness of his words caught her off guard, softening her anger just enough for fear to slip in. What if he was right? What if refusing him condemned her children to a lifetime of questions and shadows she couldn't shield them from? The storm outside intensified, wind rattling the boutique windows. Sophia turned away, pressing her palm against her flat belly as though she could still feel the echoes of those 3 small heartbeats. I don't need your empire, Julian. I don't need your name. All I've ever needed is to know they are loved. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. And do you believe I'm incapable of love? The question shattered her composure. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to hold on to the certainty that he was all power and control and nothing else. But the memory of him kneeling before their children, his voice soft as he read them stories, refused to leave her mind. Before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the boutique's glass door. Both froze. It was far too late for customers. Sophia's stomach tightened with unease as a shadow shifted beyond the rain-streaked glass. Julian moved instinctively, placing himself between her and the door, his eyes narrowing. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent.
Sophia's breath caught as dread coiled in her chest. Whoever waited outside carried more than a casual visit. The past she thought she had buried was no longer content to stay hidden, and Julian's demand for a future had just collided with a threat neither of them could yet name. The pounding on the boutique door grew sharper, echoing through the narrow space until it felt like a drumbeat against Sophia's chest. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the figure outside into a shadow that seemed larger than life. Julian's posture shifted into something protective, shoulders squared, his body angled slightly in front of hers. For all his arrogance and power, in that moment he looked like a man ready to defend what he considered his. Sophia's voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's late. No one should be here." Julian motioned for her to stay back as he unlocked the door. The wind rushed in first, sharp and cold, before the figure stepped inside. A tall woman, drenched but unshaken, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe knot, her eyes glinting with familiarity and calculation. Cassandra Beaumont. Julian stiffened at once, his jaw tightening. "What are you doing here, Cassandra?" Her laugh was smooth, practiced, the sound of someone used to owning every room she entered. "I heard whispers, Julian. A hidden woman. Children." Imagine my surprise when I found out it was true. She turned her gaze on Sophia, sharp as a blade. "So you're the secret then, the one who trapped him?" Sophia's blood ran hot, but she held her ground. "I didn't trap anyone." Cassandra's smile curved, cruel and amused. "That's not how it looks to the world. A billionaire mogul, suddenly married off, or worse, manipulated into fatherhood. The headlines write themselves." Julian's voice cut through the tension, harder than steel. "Enough. You have no right to be here, and no right to speak about them." "But Casa," Andra stepped closer, her heels clicking against the boutique floor. "No right." She tilted her head, eyes burning into Sophia. "You have no idea what kind of man you're building your life around. He doesn't love, he acquires, and when he tires of his acquisitions, he discards them." Sophia's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Every instinct screamed at her to believe, because wasn't that exactly what she had feared Julian would do? But before the doubt could root itself, Julian stepped forward, his voice raw. "Leave her out of your games, Cassandra. You already took enough from me when you betrayed me. You won't touch my family." The word family hit Sophia with unexpected force. It wasn't just the children he claimed. He had said it as if she was included too, as if she belonged in that circle he would protect with his life. Cassandra studied him, realization flickering across her expression. "So it's true. You actually care for her. That makes this all the more dangerous. Because the world I come from, Julian, doesn't forgive weakness. And love. That is the greatest weakness of all." She swept toward the door, leaving behind a chill colder than the storm outside. Sophia stood trembling, her mind torn between fury and fear. Julian closed the door firmly, locking it again before turning to face her. His eyes, still storm-dark, softened just enough to reveal the truth beneath them. "She won't stop," he said quietly, "and neither will I." Sophia's heart raced as thunder cracked across the sky. She realized their story had shifted again. The battle wasn't only between her and Julian anymore. It was between them and everything that threatened to tear their fragile, growing bond apart. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the West Village brownstone. The triplets had filled the halls with their laughter, the walls now covered in finger paintings and the chaos of toys. But underneath the hum of family life lay tension that neither Sophia nor Julian dared to name. 6 months had passed since Cassandra's midnight intrusion at the boutique, and though she had not returned in person, her presence clung like perfume, lingering in the corners of their lives. Sophia had almost grown used to Julian arriving home early enough to tuck the children in, his voice reading bedtime stories as though he had been doing it all his life. She had grown used to his quiet gestures, a telescope for Nathan, a set of tools for Lucas, a violin small enough for Mia's curious hands. But what unsettled her most were the moments when his gaze lingered on her across the dinner table, his expression unreadable, as if he were cataloging her the way he once assessed skyscrapers and acquisitions. Their arrangement, neat and defined by contract, had begun to blur. Sophia still slept in her own room, her sketches spread across her desk late into the night. Julian's door remained closed, yet sometimes she caught the faint hum of his piano in the hours before dawn, melodies filled with longing that contradicted his carefully measured words. The test came when the annual charity gala arrived.
their first appearance as husband and wife before the unforgiving eyes of Manhattan's elite. Sophia had sewn her own gown, an emerald green piece that hugged her form and whispered power with every fold of fabric. She walked into the ballroom on Julian's arm, the chandeliers scattering light across polished marble, every camera flashing as though eager to capture proof of what many still doubted was real. It didn't take long before the predator emerged from the glittering crowd. Cassandra. Ra moved through the room with the grace of a queen reclaiming her throne, her diamonds catching the light like sharp blades. She leaned in with a smile that was all venom and velvet. So this is the woman who managed what no one else could. The mysterious Mrs. Hartley. Julian's jaw tightened, but Sophia's spine straightened with defiance. She extended her hand with poise. Sophia Reyes Hartley, and you must be Cassandra Beaumont. The name carried weight, slicing through the hum of surrounding conversations. Cassandra's smirk deepened, her voice sweet as poison. Once upon a time, Julian promised forever to me, but it seems forever has a shorter shelf life than expected. Sophia didn't flinch. From what I recall, forever ended the night you chose someone else's arms. The subtle gasp from nearby onlookers rippled like a wave, the blow landing sharper than Cassandra had expected. Julian intervened, his voice cold as steel. Enough. This event is for children's lives, not your ego. He guided Sophia away, but not before Cassandra's whisper cut into the space between them. He's mine, Sophia. You're just the intermission. Later that night, as they returned to the brownstone, the words replayed in Sophia's mind. Julian carried Mia upstairs, his movements gentle, his shirt sleeves rolled back. For a moment, Sophia watched him, the billionaire reduced to a father soothing his daughter's sleepy whimpers. Something in her chest shifted painfully. Cassandra's poison worked because it mirrored her secret fear that what she shared with Julian was temporary, an arrangement destined to collapse. But when Julian finally came to her studio door, his eyes weary but intent, his words were not the ones she expected. Whatever she says, whatever games she plays, she cannot undo what we've built here. His voice was quiet but steady. She is the past. You, Sophia. You are my present, Sophia's. Heart hammered, caught between disbelief and the dangerous bloom of hope. She had no chance to reply before Nathan's cry echoed from down the hall, but the words stayed with her long into the night. Cassandra had struck, but the war she promised was only beginning, and Sophia knew the next move would test not only her faith in Julian, but the very foundation of the fragile family they had created. The weeks after the gala twisted into something darker than Sophia had expected. Cassandra was no longer content to lurk at society events or poison conversations with innuendo. She began to move like a shadow around their lives, appearing at the preschool where the triplets were enrolled, arriving at gallery openings where Sophia's designs were being quietly celebrated, even lingering outside the brownstone, once under the pretense of delivering a gift for the children. Each encounter dripped with politeness, yet beneath it all was the hum of a calculated campaign. Sophia noticed the shift in Julian first. He stayed later at the office, his phone calls growing more clipped, his silences at dinner longer. The triplets didn't see it, they only saw the father who still read to them at night. But Sophia felt the distance creeping in like a slow leak. One evening she confronted him as he loosened his tie by the window, his reflection caught against the city lights. "You've been somewhere else lately. Is it her?" He turned, his eyes hard, but there was something beneath the steel. "Work," he said too quickly. Nothing more. But doubt had already taken root. Cassandra's voice echoed in her mind, whispering about patterns, about how Julian acquired and then discarded. Sophia tried to bury the thought, but it clawed back when an envelope arrived at her boutique. Inside were photographs. Julian entering a building with a brunette woman. Julian at dinner with her, leaning close. Julian leaving that same building in the morning hours, his hair disheveled, his face shadowed. Sophia's stomach twisted, but her hands were steady as she laid the photos on the kitchen table that night. When Julian came home, she slid them across the wood toward him. "Perhaps you'd like to explain these." His eyes flicked over them once, then again, but his face revealed nothing.
Where did these come from? Anonymous delivery, she answered, which makes them all the more interesting. They are not what they look like, he said firmly. Then tell me what they are, because from where I stand they look like proof that Cassandra's prophecy is unfolding right on schedule. Julian's silence was heavier than any words. He set the photographs down, his jaw tight, his voice measured. These meetings are business, sensitive negotiations I cannot yet disclose. Sophia's heart clenched. Business that requires you to spend the night in another woman's apartment, she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked at her then, something raw breaking through his composure. It is more complicated than you think. I have not betrayed you. But his hesitation, his refusal to offer the full truth, left a crack wide enough for Cassandra's poison to seep in. That night, Sophia packed a small bag. The triplets clung to her legs as she tried to explain they were visiting Uncle Marcus for a little while. Julian watched from the doorway, his face a mask that barely contained the storm inside him. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice hoarse. And you're giving me no choice, she replied. The door shut between them, but Sophia knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. For the first time, it wasn't just their fragile marriage under threat. It was the trust that held their entire family together, and once broken, it would take more than vows or contracts to rebuild.
Uncle Marcus's small apartment was never meant to hold the energy of 3 restless children and the weight of Sophia's unraveling world. Within days, the cramped rooms overflowed with toys, coloring books, and whispered questions that pierced her heart. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" Mia asked one night, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. Sophia forced a smile, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Soon, sweetheart. He just needs time." But even as she spoke, doubt pressed against her chest like a stone. Julian had not stopped trying. Packages arrived daily, books for Nathan, a dinosaur set for Lucas, a dollhouse for Mia. Video calls lit up the evenings, his voice steady as he read bedtime stories from miles away. The children adored him, their giggles and cries of "Daddy, look at this" filling the small space. Sophia wanted to resist, to remind herself of the photographs lying heavy in her bag, but the sight of Julian's tenderness with their children shook her resolve. On the 4th day, the phone rang. Olivia's name flashed across the screen. Sophia hesitated before answering. "Before you hang up," Julian's sister said quickly, "I'm not here to take sides. I just need you to hear something." Sophia's voice was cool. "Then say it." "Cassandra engineered this," Olivia said bluntly. "The photographs, the whispers, all of it. The woman you saw Julian with isn't a mistress. She's Rebecca Sinclair, counsel for Horizon Medical. Julian's company has been negotiating an acquisition. Confidentiality was critical. Rebecca's husband represents a rival firm. The meetings had to be private." Sophia's breath caught. She wanted to believe, but the images of Julian at that building burned in her mind. "Then why not tell me?" Olivia's voice softened. "Because Julian is an idiot about personal matters. Contracts before confessions, that's his way. But make no mistake, Sophia, he has never cared for anyone the way he cares for you and those children." The words lodged in Sophia's chest, sharp with possibility. Before she could respond, a knock rattled Marcus's door. She opened it to find Julian himself, drenched from rain, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. The triplets squealed, racing to him, wrapping their small arms around his legs. His composure cracked as he knelt, pulling all 3 close. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice breaking. When Marcus gently ushered the children away, Julian rose to face Sophia. "The acquisition is finished. The secrecy is over. Cassandra set you up, and I let her. I failed to protect us." His voice faltered, stripped of arrogance. "But hear me now. I will not lose you. Not to lies, not to her, not even to my own mistakes." Sophia's defenses wavered. The storm that had carried her here felt different now. This was not the cold strategist speaking. This was a man laid bare. Yet before she could answer, Julian pulled a folded envelope from his coat. Cassandra's assistant confessed. Written proof of her scheme. She tried to take you from me. She nearly succeeded. Sophia's hand trembled as she unfolded the letter, the words confirming every suspicion. Cassandra had orchestrated everything. The betrayal was larger than she had feared. She looked up, her heart pounding, her voice low. What else is she planning? Julian's eyes darkened. That's what terrifies me, because Cassandra has already gone further than manipulation. She's watching us, and I don't know how far she's willing to go. The weight of his warning filled the small room, pressing down like a storm about to break. For the first time, Sophia realized their fight wasn't only about love or trust. It was about survival.
A wealthy man boards a private jet with his new girlfriend, ready for a romantic weekend. When he finally sees who is piloting, his blood runs cold. It was his ex-girlfriend, the one he abandoned without explanation. What happens next reveals a past he tried to bury. Before you watch, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are from so we can deliver even more videos to you. 3 minutes to take off, sir, the flight attendant announced, as Michael Dawson watched the technician make the final adjustments to the jet's engine from the window. Just then, his phone vibrated with an anonymous message. She's in the cockpit, and so is your son. The businessman choked on a sip of champagne, feeling the liquid burn his throat. Impossible, he muttered, looking at Isabel, who was touching up her lipstick, oblivious to the emotional tsunami those 7 words had unleashed. Ignoring the crew's protests, Michael stood up on an impulse and ran down the luxurious corridor. He pushed the cockpit door open with unnecessary force, only to freeze at the sight that would change his life forever. Julia, the woman he had abandoned 5 years ago, was commanding the controls with the same precision with which she had once touched his heart. And next to her, wearing a mini pilot's uniform, was a boy who was his perfect miniature reflection. Time seemed to suspend itself in that instant. The roar of the engines, the electronic signals from the control panel, everything disappeared in the face of the deafening silence of that impossible encounter. Michael felt his blood run cold in his veins as his brain struggled to process the scene before him. Sir, I must ask you to return to your seat. We are in the process of taking off. Julia spoke with a professional calm that contrasted violently with the storm in her green eyes. No tremor in her voice betrayed the emotional hurricane that was surely consuming her inside. The boy turned around, curious, his big brown eyes, the same eyes as Michael's, shining with innocence and enthusiasm. Hello, I'm Leo. Do you like planes? This one is my favorite, he said, holding up a miniature model of an aircraft. For the first time in his life, Michael Dawson, the real estate magnate known for his eloquence in any situation, was completely speechless. Sir, a flight attendant, Carla, appeared behind him. I must insist that you return to your seat for takeoff. Of course, he murmured automatically, his gaze still fixed on the boy who was smiling innocently. Of course. Stumbling down the corridor, Michael returned to his seat, his body on autopilot, while his mind spun in a whirlwind. Those eyes, that chin, even the way he tilted his head slightly. There was no possible doubt. Honey, what happened? You're as pale as if you've seen a ghost. Isabel touched his arm, her concern evident on her perfect face. A ghost? Yes, that's exactly what it was. The ghost of his past, of decisions made with the calculated coldness that had always guided his life. The ghost of a relationship he had decided to end with a simple note, without looking back, without considering consequences beyond his own emotional comfort. It's nothing, he lied in a hoarse voice. Just a slight vertigo. The aircraft's communication system emitted a soft noise before Julia's controlled voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard. Our flight to Fernando de Noronha is expected to take 2 hours and 40 minutes. The weather is perfect for flying, with a clear sky throughout the route. Please keep your seatbelts fastened during takeoff, relax, and have an excellent flight. Michael closed his eyes, every word of hers penetrating him like needles. Captain. Of course she had become a pilot. Julia had always been brilliant, determined, capable of conquering anything she desired. A talented aerospace engineer, she talked about aviation with passion, even when he condescendingly suggested it was just a hobby. The jet accelerated down the runway, pressing him against his seat. As the aircraft gained altitude, Michael felt his perfectly controlled world plummeting in a freefall. Who sent that message? The question formed in his mind, making him check his phone again. Unknown number, no identification. How could anyone know? How could anyone predict this impossible encounter? Let's toast to our weekend, Isabel suggested, already recovered from her momentary concern, pouring 2 glasses of the Dom Perignon champagne that the flight attendant had just brought. Michael nodded mechanically, his gaze still lost in the void, while his fingers touched the small object in the inside pocket of his jacket. The engagement rings he intended to use to seal a future that, in the last 5 minutes, had become terribly uncertain. To us, she raised her glass, her eyes shining with anticipation. At 20 Eve, Isabel represented everything he valued: beauty, youth, an absence of emotional complications, and an almost reverential admiration for his position and power. To us, he responded automatically, the bubbly liquid going down his throat without taste. For the next hour, Michael pretended to work on his tablet, numbers and graphs dancing senselessly before his eyes, while his mind reconstructed fragments of the past. He remembered his last night with Julia, their discussion about commitment, about building something real together. He remembered his own silent panic at the prospect of emotional vulnerability, the cold decision to cut all ties, to simply disappear. We are encountering some light turbulence. Julia's voice sounded again on the communication system. Please keep your seatbelts fastened until the sign is turned off. The aircraft shook slightly, mirroring Michael's inner turmoil. Isabel grabbed his arm, her fear of flying suddenly visible on her flawlessly made-up face. Is everything okay? He mechanically reassured, the words sounding empty. Nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. Mr. Dawson, the flight attendant approached discreetly after a few minutes. The captain requests your presence in the cockpit, if possible. Michael felt his stomach drop. Isabel raised her eyebrows, intrigued. Since when do pilots call passengers to the cockpit during flights? It must be about the arrival time, he improvised, unfastening his seatbelt. I'll be back in a minute. Every step toward the cockpit seemed to last an eternity. The jet's luxurious corridor, which had always represented his success and power, now seemed like a narrow tunnel leading to an inevitable confrontation with the consequences of his choices. Upon entering the cockpit, he found only Leo, still playing with his toy plane. The boy smiled when he saw him. Mommy said to wait here because she needed to check something in the back. Do you want to see my plane collection? The boy opened a small, colorful backpack, revealing carefully organized miniatures. Michael sat down slowly in the co-pilot's seat, watching that child, his son, with a mixture of fascination and terror. How was it possible that this small being existed without him knowing? How was it possible that something so significant could occur in a world he always believed he completely controlled? This is my favorite, Leo continued, oblivious to the emotional turmoil of the man beside him. It's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Mommy said that one day we'll pilot a real one together. Your mom, is she a good pilot? Michael asked, his voice almost a whisper. The best in the world. The boy's enthusiasm was contagious. She knows everything about planes, and she also teaches me math and physics. I'm going to be a pilot just like her when I grow up. The cockpit door opened, and Julia returned, her gaze meeting Michael's for a brief moment, before returning to the instruments. Leo, honey, Carla will take you to see the rest of the plane, okay? I need to talk to Mr. Dawson. The boy nodded animatedly, collecting his planes before following the flight attendant. When the door closed, the silence in the cockpit became almost tangible. He doesn't know, Julia finally spoke, her eyes fixed on the control panel. For him, his dad is a pilot who works on international routes and can't be present. Why didn't you tell me? Michael questioned, his voice trembling with contained emotion. Tell you? She finally turned to face him, years of pain contained in her gaze. To the man who disappeared leaving only a note, who blocked my number, who instructed his employees to tell me he had moved to another country? Michael had no answer. For the first time, he saw the magnitude of his actions through someone else's eyes. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you left, she continued, her voice controlled, professional. And I decided that my son deserved more than a father who didn't want to be found. The plane shook again with more turbulence, mirroring Michael's internal agitation. And this meeting is a coincidence? A faint smile appeared on Julia's lips. Do you believe in coincidences, Michael? In a world with thousands of pilots and hundreds of executive aviation companies. Before he could respond, the panel emitted an alert demanding Julia's attention. Please return to your seat. We have a technical problem to solve. And what kind of problem? Concern was evident in his voice. Nothing your precious model girlfriend needs to worry about, Julia replied, the first sign of emotion in her perfectly controlled voice. Just a secondary hydraulic system failure. We'll have to make an unscheduled landing for a checkup. Michael stood up, stunned. Where? Casimiro de Abreu, she replied, adjusting some controls. A small town in the interior of the Rio de Janeiro state. It has a good runway and excellent mechanics. Upon mentioning the name of the city, her eyes met his again, and Michael understood. It wasn't just any city with a suitable runway. It was where Julia was living, where his son was growing up. This isn't a coincidence, is it? He murmured, understanding finally forming. Julia's look was unreadable when she responded. Life rarely gives us second chances, Michael. What we do with them is our choice. As he returned to his seat, feeling the plane begin a gentle descent, Michael reread the mysterious message on his phone. She's in the cockpit, and so is your son. Who could have known? Who would be orchestrating this impossible encounter? Hibo looked at Isabel, distracted by a fashion magazine, completely oblivious to the emotional earthquake that was redefining the landscape of his life. The rings in his pocket seemed to weigh tons now, as the jet descended toward a small town that, he sensed, would change his destiny forever. Any problem? Isabel asked, noticing his disturbed expression. Change of plans, he replied, his voice strangely calm considering the internal chaos. We'll need to make a technical stop before heading to the resort. The landing sign lit up, and Julia's voice, professional and controlled, filled the cabin one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent procedure for the regional airport of Casimiro de Abreu. Due to technical reasons, we will make an unscheduled stop. We ask that you remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your understanding. Michael Dawson, the man who built a real estate empire, planning every move with millimeter precision, who never left anything to chance. He now found himself completely adrift, descending toward a future he could not predict or control. For the first time in his life, the man who always had all the answers was completely speechless, before the most important question he had ever faced. How to be a father to a son he didn't know existed. The small Casimiro de Abreu airport was little more than a concrete runway with a modest hangar and a makeshift waiting room. When the jet's stairs were positioned and the door opened, Michael felt the humid heat of the interior of Rio de Janeiro state envelop him like a premonition. The relentless midday sun reflected on the asphalt, creating waves of heat that distorted the mountainous landscape in the background. "Welcome to Casimiro de Abreu," Julia announced to the group, her professional voice contrasting with the intensity of her gaze when it briefly met Michael's. "Unfortunately, we'll need a few hours for maintenance. The problem with the secondary hydraulic system requires parts that are being brought from Rio. I recommend that you take the opportunity to see the city or rest at the local hotel." "Local hotel!" Isabel couldn't hide the horror in her voice, her eyes scanning the countryside landscape with obvious discomfort. "What kind of place is this?" Michael watched little Leo skip down the stairs, the child's energy in full contrast with the palpable tension between the adults. The boy held Julia's hand tightly, looking at everything around him with the insatiable curiosity typical of a 5-year-old. "Mommy, can we go see the planes in the hangar before we go home?" the little one asked, pulling lightly on her uniform sleeve. Home. The word echoed in Michael's mind. This place was their home. His son had grown up here, away from him, building memories he would never be a part of. "We have guests today, honey," Julia replied, stroking the boy's hair. "We need to be good hosts." "Mr. Dawson and the lady are going to our house?" The enthusiasm in the boy's voice made Michael's heart ache. "Can I show them my complete collection of planes?" Before Julia could respond, an elderly man approached, walking with the aid of a carved cane. His shrewd eyes examined the group for a moment before he broke into a warm smile. "Grandpa Carlos." Leo ran to the old man, who lifted him up with surprising strength for his apparent age. "These are our passengers," Julia explained, maintaining her professional composure. "Mr. Michael Dawson and Ms. Isabel Montero. We have a technical problem and will need to stay until tomorrow." The old man Carlos's eyes fixed on Michael with a disconcerting intensity, as if he saw far beyond the businessman's polished facade. "Dawson," he repeated slowly. "The famous real estate businessman. What an interesting coincidence." Yet there was nothing casual in his tone, and Michael immediately realized that the old man knew exactly who he was, and what he represented in Julia and Leo's lives. "Well, we can't leave our visitors without proper accommodation," Carlos continued. "Our guest house is at your disposal, although it's not as luxurious as the hotels you must be used to." "Guest house?" Isabel whispered to Michael, her displeasure evident. "I appreciate the offer," Michael replied, feeling strangely vulnerable under the old man's penetrating gaze. "But we don't want to bother you. There must be a hotel in the city." "The only hotel is under renovation." Carlos smiled, a sparkle of amusement in his eyes. "Our guest house is small but comfortable, and it's close to the mechanic's workshop, which will make it easier when the parts arrive." Michael realized the subtly constructed trap. There were no coincidences there, from the technical failure to the only available accommodation option. "Grandpa makes the best breakfast in the world," Leo exclaimed, hanging on the old man's neck. "And there's a lake where we can see turtles." "It seems we don't have much of a choice," Michael conceded, trying to ignore Isabel's furious look. 20 minutes later, an old truck parked in front of a charming colonial house, converted into a guest house. Well-kept gardens framed the century-old building, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. In the background, a serene lake reflected the blue sky, and green mountains completed the bucolic landscape. "Welcome to the Blue Horizon Guest House," Carlos announced, leading them across the polished wooden porch. "We only have 5 suites, but all of them have a view of the lake or the mountains. The interior was a harmonious combination of preserved antiques and discreetly integrated modern comforts. Black and white photographs decorated the walls, telling the story of the region and the family. "It's charming," Isabel commented, clearly disappointed but trying to be polite. Leo pulled Michael's hand, taking him by surprise. "Come see my room. It has a whole wall of planes." Then Michael shot a questioning look at Julia, who gave a slight, authorizing nod, allowing him to follow the boy. The corridor they walked down was decorated with more old photographs, many of them showing a younger Julia, some with an elderly man in a pilot's uniform, whom Michael presumed to be Julia's grandfather. Leo's room was a miniature aviation dream. An entire wall had been transformed into a sky, with hand-painted clouds and dozens of model planes hung at different altitudes. A cockpit-shaped bed dominated the center, and shelves displayed children's books about aviation, many in English and Spanish. "This is me when I grow up," Leo pointed to a poster of a pilot in front of a Boeing 787. "I'm going to fly all over the world, just like my dad." Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "Your dad?" "He's an international pilot," Leo responded with innocent pride. "Mommy says he flies so far and for so long that he can't visit us. But one day, when I'm a pilot too, I'll find him in the sky." The simplicity of the explanation, the purity of the hope in the boy's eyes, hit Michael like a physical punch. What kind of man had he become for Julia to need to create this story? What kind of man would he be now, in the face of this revelation? "I'm sure you will," he managed to say in a trembling voice. "Leo!" Julia appeared at the door, her gaze cautious. "Time for lunch, honey. Go wash your hands." The boy ran out, leaving Michael and Julia alone in the room, filled with childhood dreams. "You told him that his dad is a pilot," Michael murmured, not as an accusation, but as a painful observation. "It seemed appropriate," she responded, crossing her arms defensively. "He's loved planes since he was little. It must be in the blood." "Julia, don't," she interrupted, her voice low but firm. "Not here, not now. We have a lunch to survive with your son and your girlfriend at the same table. One drama at a time, Michael." She was right as always. Julia had always been the sensible one, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while he just reacted. Lunch was served on the back porch, overlooking the lake. The table was set with simple elegance: a linen tablecloth, old china, polished silver cutlery. Carlos presided at the head of the table, with Leo at his side. Julia sat next to her son, while Michael and Isabel occupied the opposite side. "I hope you like homemade food," Carlos commented, as a middle-aged woman served a steaming vegetable soup. "Ms. Zelia has been our cook for 30 years. "It's delicious," Michael commented sincerely after the first spoonful, surprising himself. When was the last time he had appreciated something as simple as homemade soup? "So, Mr. Dawson," Carlos started the conversation after a few minutes of awkward silence. "How did you meet our Julia?" Michael almost choked on his bread, while Isabel raised her eyebrows, clearly interested in the answer. "We met at an aerospace engineering event," Julia responded quickly. "Mr. Dawson was investing in a private airport project." "Ah, yes," Carlos smiled, not convinced by the half-truth. "And now you meet again years later. Destiny has curious ways." "Do you believe in destiny?" Isabel asked, trying to participate in the conversation. "I believe in consequences," the old man responded, his eyes fixed on Michael. "Every choice we make creates waves that eventually return to our shore, no matter how far we swim to avoid them." The silence that followed was interrupted only by the clinking of cutlery, and Leo's occasional voice, oblivious to the tension between the adults, animatedly recounting his day at school. After dessert, a pumpkin pudding with cinnamon, which Michael was surprised to enjoy, Carlos suggested they rest a little before dinner. "The sweets are ready. I imagine you are tired from the trip." "Actually," Isabel rose gracefully, "I'd love to see a bit of the city. Michael, would you mind accompanying me?" Before he could respond, Leo intervened enthusiastically. "Can I show you the city? I know all the cool places." The look of panic Michael shot at Julia was met with a slight, challenging smile. "It would be educational for Leo to serve as a guide," she commented casually. "If you don't mind, of course." Michael began, looking at Isabel, who was clearly not enthusiastic about the idea. "I'll go with you," Julia decided. "There are places Leo doesn't know well yet. We can show them the lookout and the historic church." The small excursion through the rural town became a strange emotional journey for Michael. Seeing Leo running ahead, enthusiastically pointing out details that only a child would notice, with Julia walking silently by his side, created a disturbing illusion of family life that never existed. Isabel, noticing the strange dynamic, subtly distanced herself, feigning interest in the windows of the small craft shops. "He's extraordinary," Michael commented in a low voice, watching Leo explain to a visibly uncomfortable Isabel how the old clocks in the church tower worked. "He is," Julia agreed. "In spite of you," the harshness of the words contrasting with the softness of her voice. "Julia, I didn't know." "Would it have made a difference?" she interrupted, finally looking at him directly. "If you had known I was pregnant when you decided to leave only a note and disappear?" The question hung between them, heavy as the humid air before a storm. Michael wanted to say yes, that he never would have left if he had known. But the truth was much more complex. Would the man he was 5 years ago have stayed? Or would he have just offered financial support, maintaining the emotional distance he had always cherished? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I was a different person then." "And who are you now, Michael?" The question was almost a whisper. The man who is going to ask the model to marry him, or the man who just found out he has a son? Before he could answer, Leo returned running, holding something in his hands. "Look what I found, Mommy. A wooden plane. The man at the store said it's handmade." "It's beautiful, honey," Julia smiled, stroking her son's hair. "Can I, Mommy?" "Please." The boy looked hopeful, having clearly discussed something with the craftsman at the store. "All right, but only for a moment." Leo turned to Michael, holding out the small wooden plane. "Do you want to hold it? The man said it brings good luck when we give it to someone special to touch first." The world seemed to stop as Michael received the gift from the small hands. Something so simple, a wooden toy, suddenly carried the weight of all the choices he had made and all the ones he still had to make. "It's very special," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Leo." In the distance, Isabel watched the scene, a calculating expression gradually replacing her initial discomfort. Night fell over Casimiro de Abreu with a speed typical of small towns. Dinner at the guest house was served by candlelight in the garden, under a starry sky that Michael could barely remember when he had last appreciated. After dinner, while Leo was being put to bed, the adults gathered in the living room. Carlos served an amber drink in small crystal glasses. "Homemade cachaça," he explained. "Aged in oak barrels for 20 years, perfect for difficult conversations." Isabel looked at her watch, a discreet but visibly expensive model. "I think I'll turn in," she announced, giving a meaningful look to Michael. "It's been an unexpected day." When she left the room, Carlos also stood up. "I believe you two have a lot to discuss," he said, his wise eyes moving between Michael and Julia. "Just remember, Some structures, once broken, can never be rebuilt exactly as they were. But sometimes, what is built in their place is stronger, more true. With these enigmatic words, the old man withdrew, leaving them alone with the heavy silence and the sweet aroma of the cachaça. "Why now?" Michael finally asked. "After 5 years?" Julia swirled the liquid in her glass, watching the candlelight reflect in the facets of the crystal. "It wasn't my idea," she admitted. "But when the opportunity arose, I couldn't refuse." "What opportunity?" "Your mother." Julia met his eyes, the revelation hanging between them like smoke. "She found me 6 months ago." Michael felt his blood run cold. "My mother? How?" "Private investigators. Apparently, she always suspected that you might have a child somewhere. She said you followed a predictable pattern. Intense involvement followed by abrupt flight when things got emotionally deep." The description of his behavior was striking in its accuracy. It was exactly what he had done with Julia, and with others before her. "And Isabel? Is she also part of this plan?" Julia's smile was sad, almost compassionate. "Your girlfriend is Amanda Vidal, a private investigator hired by your mother more than a year ago. She's not an international model, Michael. She has a law degree and specializes in locating people and building behavioral profiles." The shock of the revelation was like a physical blow. Michael stood up abruptly, his mind reeling with the implications. 2 years of a relationship, all the intimate moments, the confidences exchanged, all part of an elaborate trap? "I don't believe it," he murmured, although deep down he knew it was true. It explained the mysterious message, the calculated serenity of Isabel, or rather, Amanda, in the face of the day's strange situations. "Why would my mother do this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "That," Julia responded softly, "is something you will have to ask her. She'll be here tomorrow." The sunrise in Casimiro de Abreu brought a symphony of sounds Michael had forgotten existed. The chirping of birds, the soft rustle of the wind in the leaves, the distant lowing of cattle on neighboring farms. Sitting on the guest house porch, a cup of strong coffee between his hands, the businessman watched the first rays of sun paint the lake golden, while his mind processed the previous night's revelations. Isabel, or rather, Amanda, was not in her room when he returned. His first impulse was to call his lawyer, initiate some kind of legal process against this invasion of privacy, this elaborate manipulation. But something stopped him. Perhaps the aged cachaça, perhaps Julia's sincere gaze, or perhaps, just perhaps, the weight of a responsibility that was beginning to take concrete form in his consciousness. "You were always an early riser." His mother's voice startled him, making him almost spill his coffee. Catherine Dawson, at 6, maintained the discreet elegance and impeccable posture that had always characterized her. Dressed with a simplicity that still screamed sophistication, she sat in the chair next to her son, her eyes, the same brown eyes he'd inherited, studying him with that familiar intensity. "Mother," Michael managed to say, surprise giving way to confusion, and then to irritation. "You have a lot to explain." "I do," she agreed calmly, pouring herself coffee from the thermos on the rustic table. "Just as you do." And the silence between them stretched for a few moments, filled only by the sounds of awakening nature. Michael struggled to organize his thoughts, to formulate the right questions, to understand how his own mother, the woman who had always respected his space, his decisions, his independence, had orchestrated such an elaborate intervention in his life. "Why?" was all he could finally ask. Catherine took a deep breath, her eyes lost in the landscape for a moment before returning to her son. "Because you are becoming your father," she responded with a softness that did not diminish the force of the words. And I promised myself, when I first held you, that I would do everything in my power to prevent that from happening. The mention of his father made Michael stiffen. Arthur Dawson had been a ruthless businessman, building an empire at the cost of destroyed relationships, including his marriage and his relationship with his son. He had died alone in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by wealth and empty of genuine connections. "I'm not like him," Michael protested, his voice low but firm. "No?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "How many relationships have you ended at the first sign of emotional depth? How many times have you abandoned people who cared about you because it was easier than facing your own vulnerability? Your father did the exact same thing, Michael. The difference is he had me to clean up the mess." The words hit Michael like precisely thrown stones, each one finding a truth he had spent years denying. "And who cleaned up my mess?" he asked, fearing the answer. "No one," Catherine responded simply. "Julia refused any contact, any help. When I finally found out about Leo, through investigators I hired out of a purely maternal intuition, she had already rebuilt her life here." How is she now?" The question escaped before Michael could contain it. A small smile curved Catherine's lips. "Extraordinary. She used her engineering background to specialize in aviation. She works for 3 different companies. She flies to international destinations. She raised a son alone. She built an impeccable reputation, and yet made time to be an active part of this community." The pride in his mother's voice when she spoke of Julia was undisguisable, and Michael felt a pang of jealousy, not of the admiration for Julia, but of the strength of character that he himself had never been able to demonstrate. "And now?" he asked, placing the empty cup on the table. "What do you expect to happen? That I abandon my life, my businesses, and move to this small town to play happy family?" The look Catherine gave her son was a mixture of disappointment and stubborn hope. "I expect that you, for the first time in your life, face the consequences of your choices instead of running from them. That you get to know your son, not because you have to, but because he deserves to be known. And maybe, just maybe, that you learn there are things more valuable in this life than corporate mergers and quarterly profits." Before Michael could respond, the sound of children's footsteps interrupted the conversation. Leo appeared on the porch, still in his pajamas, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Good morning," he murmured, then froze when he saw Catherine. His eyes went wide, the sleepiness instantly replaced by a vibrant curiosity. "You're the lady from the portrait," Catherine smiled, genuinely surprised. "Portrait?" "In Grandpa Carlos's office," Leo explained, approaching cautiously. "There's a picture of you with him from a long time ago. Grandpa said you were a great friend of the family." Michael looked at his mother, confused. Catherine seemed equally surprised by the mention of the portrait, but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, I met your grandfather many years ago," she confirmed, "even before you were born." Leo studied Catherine with an almost comical intensity, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "You look like him," he declared finally, pointing to Michael. "That's my mother," Michael explained. The word sounded strange in his own ears. "So that makes her your grandmother?" Leo's eyes lit up with the realization. "You're my grandma?" Catherine shot a quick look at Michael before nodding. "Yes, honey, I am your grandma." What happened next took Michael completely by surprise. Leo threw himself into Catherine's arms with total abandon, hugging her as if he had found a lost treasure. "I have a grandma," he exclaimed, the pure joy in his voice making something break inside Michael's chest. "Wait until I tell Peter at school. He has 3 grandmas, but his grandma isn't as pretty as you." Catherine laughed, hugging her grandson with a naturalness that made Michael realize This was not their first meeting. The thought should have angered him. Another manipulation, another secret. But instead, he felt only a deep sadness for the moments he had missed. The first words, first steps, first smiles he had never witnessed. "Have you had breakfast yet, champ?" Catherine asked, pulling back enough to look at her grandson's animated face. "Not yet. Mommy said I can have hot chocolate today because it's a special day." "And what special day is this?" Michael couldn't help but ask. Leo looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "Important visitor day. Grandpa Carlos said people who come from far away deserve hot chocolate." The simplicity of the child's logic made Michael smile involuntarily. There was something refreshing about the way children saw the world, without the layers of complication that adults added to everything. "Leo, honey," Julia's voice sounded from the porch door, "don't bother the guests so early." "I'm not bothering them," the boy protested. "I'm meeting my grandma." Julia froze, her eyes meeting Catherine's in a silent dialogue that Michael couldn't decipher. There was history there, deeper than he had initially imagined. "Good morning, Catherine," Julia finally said, approaching. "I didn't know you would arrive so early." "The first flight," Catherine responded simply. "Carlos picked me up at the airport." Another piece of the puzzle. Carlos, Julia's grandfather, was clearly involved in this family conspiracy. The more Michael discovered, the more he realized how elaborate the web woven around him had been. "Leo, go get dressed for breakfast," Julia instructed gently. "Then you can show Catherine your new airport model." The boy nodded enthusiastically before running inside, leaving the three adults in a silence heavy with unresolved tension. "How long have you known my mother, exactly?" Michael finally asked Julia. "Personally for 6 months," she responded, sitting at the table. "But through letters, almost 3 years." "Letters?" Michael looked at Catherine, incredulous. "In the digital age," his mother shrugged elegantly. "Some conversations are too sacred for emails that can be hacked, or messages that can be spied on. And there's something about handwriting that forces sincerity, don't you think?" Before Michael could fully process this new information, Amanda, the fake Isabel, appeared on the porch, dressed in practical clothes that contrasted dramatically with the elaborate style she had maintained during the 2 years of her relationship with Michael. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her accent subtly different from what Michael was used to. "I imagine it's time for us to drop the pretenses." Michael stood up abruptly. 2 years, Amanda. 2 years of lies. "I prefer to think of it as 2 years of in-depth research," she responded calmly. "And believe me, Michael, I learned much more about you than I ever needed to reveal to your mother." "Why?" The question was addressed to everyone and no one in particular. "Why this elaborate theater? Why not just tell me about Leo?" "We tried," Julia responded softly. "In the first few months after I found out I was pregnant, I sent dozens of emails, left countless messages, all blocked, all ignored. And when I finally found you," Catherine continued, "you were so immersed in your world of business, so convinced of your own narrative, that any mention of past responsibilities was immediately rejected. We needed you to see," Amanda added, "not just hear about it, not just know about it intellectually, but see your son, feel his reality, understand what you were missing before it was too late." Michael sat down again, stunned by the brutal sincerity of these 3 women, who each in their own way had conspired to confront him with the truth he had spent years avoiding. "And what happens now?" he asked, his voice more vulnerable than he had ever allowed in public. "That," Julia responded, "depends entirely on you. Not on the Dawson Empire, not on the impeccable CEO, not on the man who built skyscrapers and exclusive resorts. It depends on Michael, the man, the father, the person you choose to be from today onwards." The silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Carlos, carrying a tray with homemade cakes and more fresh coffee. The old man assessed the scene with shrewd eyes before smiling. "I see that the formal introductions have been made," he commented casually. "Excellent. I hate secrets at breakfast. They hinder digestion." The comment, so mundane amidst the emotional intensity of the moment, provoked reluctant laughter around the table, momentarily easing the tension. "Catherine," Carlos continued, sitting at the head of the table, "Leo is anxious to show you his collection. I believe he inherited his grandfather's technical eye." The casual mention of the relationship made Michael look up. "You were a pilot," he remembered, connecting the dots. "In the photos in the hallway." Carlos nodded. 42-year career. I started in small cargo planes and ended up commanding Boeing 747-47s for Varig. The passion for flying has been in the family for 3 generations now. 4, Catherine corrected softly. Michael's father was also fascinated by aviation, although he never pursued a career. Another unexpected revelation. Michael looked at his mother, confused. "Dad rarely talked about anything he couldn't completely control," Catherine responded. "And the sky, Michael? The sky can never be truly controlled. It can only be respected, understood, navigated with humility." The analogy did not go unnoticed. Michael glimpsed for the first time the possibility that his life, so carefully planned, so rigidly controlled, might be missing exactly what would make it meaningful. The ability to adapt to the unexpected, to navigate the uncontrollable, to find beauty in unpredictability. Leo returned at that moment, now fully dressed and brimming with energy. "Grandma, are you coming to see my collection now? It has a plane just like the one Mr. Michael came in. It's a Gulfstream G150. Michael looked at his son, with a new perspective. This small being, whom he had not helped raise, whom he had not known until yesterday, had already absorbed knowledge about aviation that many adults did not possess. The technical precision, the attention to detail, the passion for knowledge were traits he recognized in himself, although directed at different fields. "Why don't we all go?" he suggested, surprising himself. "I'd like to see your collection too, Leo," when the smile that lit up the boy's face was like a ray of sunshine piercing heavy clouds. Bright, unexpected, transformative. For a brief moment, Michael glimpsed what could have been, and perhaps what could still be. As they followed Leo down the guest house hallway, Julia approached Michael, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "He has your smile," she commented, "and your stubbornness." There was no bitterness in her words, just a simple statement of undeniable biological facts. Michael nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. The visit to Leo's room turned into an impromptu lesson on aviation, with the boy displaying surprising knowledge for his age. With each enthusiastic explanation, each meticulous demonstration, Michael felt something unknown growing in his chest, a mixture of pride, admiration, and sadness for the lost years. The hours turned into days, as the supposed technical failure of the jet conveniently extended. Michael discovered that his phone mysteriously didn't get an adequate signal for video conferences, limiting him to brief emails and text messages to his team. The Dawson Empire would continue to function without his constant presence, a realization both liberating and disturbing for a man who had always believed himself to be indispensable. On the afternoon of the third day, Michael found himself sitting by the lake, watching Leo feed the ducks with pieces of old bread. Next to the boy, Catherine was laughing at something he had said, her eyes shining with a joy that Michael had rarely witnessed. "He's completely won over my mother," he commented when Julia approached, bringing a tray with fresh lemonade. "Leo has that effect on people," she responded, sitting on the rustic bench next to him. "It's as if he can see directly through the layers we've built over the years." But Michael nodded, watching his son. It was still strange to think of him that way, running after a particularly bold duck that was trying to steal the bread directly from his hands. "Does he know?" He finally asked the question that had been consuming him for days. "About me, I mean." Julia took a sip of lemonade, her eyes fixed on the scene in front of her. "He knows that his dad is someone who couldn't be present, who works far away, who one day might be able to be a part of his life." "Gentle lies," Michael murmured. "Adapted truths," Julia corrected. "Leo is still too young to understand abandonment or rejection. When he's older, if you decide to be a part of his life, he'll understand that people make mistakes, learn, and grow. And what if I don't make that choice?" The question escaped before he could contain it. Julia turned to face him, her green eyes studying him intensely. "Then I will continue to raise our son to be a better man than his father, a man who faces his responsibilities instead of running from them." The harshness of the words contrasted with the softness of her voice, making them even more impactful. Michael realized that despite everything, Julia didn't hate him. She just saw him with absolute clarity, without the illusions he had cultivated about himself for so long. "Why aviation?" he asked, changing the subject. "Of all the careers you could have pursued, with your brilliance, why did you choose one that keeps you constantly on the move?" A slight smile curved her lips. "Perhaps because in the sky, Michael, there's no way to feign absolute control. You can have the best training, the most advanced aircraft, the most meticulous planning, but you will still be at the mercy of elements you cannot master. The wind, the air currents, sudden weather changes. And that's liberating for you." "It's honest," she responded simply. "And after years of living an illusion of security by your side, I've discovered that I prefer the honesty of uncertainty 1,000 times over the false security of empty promises." Michael felt the impact of the words like a physical blow. It was true. He had built relationships based on implicit promises he never intended to keep, on expectations he had fueled without ever considering their emotional cost to others. Before he could respond, Leo came running toward them, his face illuminated by a radiant smile. "Look what I found!" he exclaimed, opening his small hands to reveal a small turtle. "Grandpa Carlos said it's a baby tiger turtle. Can we build a little house for it in the lake?" Michael looked at Julia, unsure of how to respond. She nodded slightly, giving him silent permission to participate in this moment. "I think the little turtle already has a house," he replied, surprising himself with the naturalness in his voice. "The whole lake is its home. If we take it somewhere else, it might miss its family." Leo's face grew serious as he considered the words. "Just like you missed your family when you went to work far away?" The innocent question hit Michael with unexpected force. How to explain to a child that he had deliberately chosen distance instead of connection, that working far away was a fabricated story to soften a much more painful truth? "Sometimes," he responded carefully, "adults make mistakes. They think they're doing the right thing, but then they realize they've lost important things along the way." Leo studied his face with surprising intensity for such a small child. "Like what?" "Like meeting wonderful people," Michael responded honestly. "Like you?" The smile returned to the boy's face. "You can visit whenever you want. We have a guest room, and Grandpa Carlos makes pancakes on Sundays." The simplicity of the offer, the uncomplicated generosity, made something break inside Michael's chest. How could this small being, who had never received anything from him, so freely offer what he had? "Thank you, Leo," he managed to say, stroking the boy's hair. "That's very kind." After carefully releasing the turtle into the water, Leo ran back to Catherine, who was waiting for him, with a mysterious package that looked suspiciously like an airplane model kit. "He's extraordinary," Michael commented, watching his son walk away. "He is," Julia agreed. In spite of everything, the silence that followed was interrupted by the arrival of Amanda, now dressed in practical clothes that contrasted dramatically with the elaborate wardrobe she had maintained as Isabel. "News arrived from Rio," she announced, sitting down with them. "The parts for the plane have finally been located. They'll be here tomorrow afternoon." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Have you finally decided to end our little family intervention?" Amanda smiled humorlessly. "My job is done, Michael. What you do with the information you've obtained is entirely your choice." "And what choice is that, exactly?" he asked, irritation growing in his voice. "Abandon the life I built to become a weekend dad? Or simply sign generous child support checks and go on as if nothing happened?" Julia stood up abruptly. "This is a conversation I'd rather not witness. Please excuse me." As she walked away, Amanda watched her with a thoughtful expression before turning to Michael. "Do you know what the most difficult part of my job was for the past 2 years?" she asked rhetorically. "It wasn't pretending to be interested in your endless business stories or participating in tedious corporate events. It was witnessing an intelligent and capable man live a completely empty life without even realizing it." "Empty," Michael repeated, indignant. "I built an empire that employs thousands of people. I transformed entire neighborhoods. I revolutionized the country's luxury real estate market. And when you go back to your 50 million penthouse at night, who is there to hear about your day?" Amanda asked softly. "When you receive an award, who genuinely celebrates your success? When you get sick, who holds your hand?" The questions hung between them, uncomfortably precise. Michael looked away, unable to sustain the intensity in Amanda's eyes. "Your mother didn't do this out of cruelty, Michael," she continued. "She did it out of love, because she saw her own husband walk the same path and end up alone, despite all his wealth and power." "What do you know about my father?" Michael asked defensively. "I know he also had a son he didn't acknowledge," Amanda replied calmly. "A son who grew up without knowing his true origins until a rare genetic disease revealed the truth." Michael felt his blood run cold in his veins. "What are you talking about?" "Ask your mother." Amanda stood up. "Some stories are not mine to tell." She walked away, leaving Michael with more questions than answers, a pattern that seemed to define his days in that small town. That night, the guest house hosted a special dinner in the garden, illuminated by colorful lanterns hung from the trees. A long table had been set, covered with a white linen tablecloth and decorated with wildflowers in rustic vases. The food, simple but delicious, was served on artisanal ceramic platters, accompanied by red wine, produced at a nearby winery. Leo was allowed to stay up past his usual bedtime, participating in the meal with the adults, although his energy clearly began to wane as the night wore on. Eventually, he fell asleep on Julia's lap, who continued to participate in the conversation while gently stroking her son's hair. "It's time to put him to bed," she murmured, trying to stand up without waking the boy. "Can I help?" Michael offered impulsively. Julia hesitated for a moment before nodding. With care, Michael took Leo into his arms, surprising himself with how much the small body weighed, a comforting weight that seemed to fill a void in his chest he didn't even know existed. Following Julia down the hallway, he entered the boy's room, now familiar after days of visits to see his plane collection and hear endless stories about famous pilots and extraordinary aircraft. With a tenderness he didn't know he possessed, Michael laid Leo on the cockpit-shaped bed. The boy stirred slightly, but didn't wake up when Julia carefully removed his shoes and covered him with a comforter decorated with clouds and planes. "Does he always sleep like this?" Michael asked in a low voice. "So peacefully." "Most nights," Julia responded, adjusting the position of the pillow. "Except when there are thunderstorms. He's afraid of thunder." Another detail about his son that Michael never would have known if it weren't for this elaborate intervention. How many others were there? First tooth, first word, first step. Milestones he had irrecoverably lost. "Why are you letting me into his life now?" he asked when they left the room, leaving the door ajar as per Julia's instructions. "After 5 years of keeping him away from me." Julia leaned against the hallway wall, her eyes studying him with that familiar intensity that always left him uncomfortably exposed. "Because Leo is starting to ask questions I can no longer answer with stories about pilots on international routes," she responded honestly. "Because he deserves the chance to know his complete story, even if that includes a father who chose not to be a part of his life." "And what if I want to be a part of it now?" The words escaped before Michael could fully consider them. "That would depend entirely on your terms, Michael," Julia responded, crossing her arms defensively. "Leo is not a weekend project or a social obligation to impress investors. He is a complete person with emotional needs, with expectations, with a heart that can be easily broken." "I wouldn't do that," Michael protested. "You already did," Julia responded simply. "With me, with others before me, I imagine. It's a pattern, Michael, one that your mother recognized because she lived with your father. The question is, are you willing to break this cycle, truly, or just reacting emotionally to a situation that will soon seem less urgent when you're back in your world of skyscrapers and offshore bank accounts?" The brutal frankness of her words hit Michael like cold water, waking him up to truths he had avoided confronting his entire adult life. "I don't know," he admitted finally, the honesty painful but necessary. "I want to believe I am. I want to be better than my father was, but I don't know if I know how." Julia's face softened slightly at this unexpected vulnerability. "No one is born knowing how to be a father, Michael. It's a skill you learn daily, through trial and error. The difference is that some choose to learn, while others run away at the first sign of difficulty." Michael nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of the choice before him. It wasn't just about legally acknowledging Leo or providing financial support. It was about committing to a journey of personal growth that would require more courage from him than any business negotiation had ever demanded. The first rays of sun filtered through the guest room window, waking Michael from a surprisingly deep sleep. For a moment, he was disoriented, accustomed to the panorama of skyscrapers that his penthouse in Sao Paulo offered. Instead, he saw only blue sky, distant mountains, and the golden shimmer of the lake through the window. A week had passed since his unplanned arrival in Casimiro de Abreu, a week that felt simultaneously like an instant and an eternity. The jet's technical failure had finally been resolved, and today was the day to leave or to choose to stay in some way. He got up and walked to the window. In the garden below, Leo was playing with a small glider plane, running and throwing it into the air repeatedly, adjusting the angle with each attempt, intuitively learning about aerodynamics through play. Julia was watching him closely, smiling as she drank her morning cup of coffee. Michael felt a sharp pang in his chest, not of pain, but of recognition. The scene below was a glimpse of a life he had never lived, of a possibility he had thrown away, without ever understanding its value. His phone vibrated on the bedside table. The signal, miraculously restored the night before, brought dozens of emails, messages, and notifications, his empire calling him back. One notification in particular caught his attention. Dawson Incorporacion's shares had fallen 3%, after rumors about an unacknowledged heir of the CEO. The news had already leaked then. Probably the work of some employee at the airport, who recognized the famous businessman boarding with the international model and disembarking in a small town with a pilot and a child who was his mirror image. Another email, this one from his financial director, warned of an urgent board meeting needed to control damage to the company's image. Michael almost laughed at the irony. His entire adult life dedicated to building an impeccable reputation, and now the existence of his own son was considered damage to be controlled. He dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, as if he were making a decision with each button he buttoned, each clothing choice. When he finally went down for breakfast, he found the family gathered in the garden. Not just Julia and Leo, but also Carlos, Catherine, and surprisingly Amanda, still present despite her mission being technically complete. "Good morning," he greeted, feeling strangely nervous, as if he were about to give a crucial presentation to investors, instead of having coffee with people who, in different ways, were his family. "Michael!" Leo waved animatedly. "Look how far my plane can fly now." The boy threw the small glider, which this time traced a graceful arc through the air before landing gently on the grass several feet away. "Impressive," Michael commented genuinely, sitting at the table. "Did you adjust the angle of the wings?" Leo nodded enthusiastically. "Grandpa Carlos showed me how. It's all about aerodynamics." Leo has an intuitive understanding of physics that is truly remarkable for his age, Julia commented, passing Michael a cup of coffee. His science teacher says he asks questions that many adults wouldn't think to ask. The pride in her voice was evident, as was the silent implication. "You missed all of this. 5 years of achievements, discoveries, firsts. I imagine you're anxious to return to civilization," Carlos commented, watching him over his reading glasses, the local newspaper open in front of him. "The jet has been ready since last night." "Actually," Michael began, surprising himself with the words that followed. "I was thinking of staying a few more days if it's not inconvenient." The silence that followed was eloquent. Julia looked up from her cup, visibly surprised. Catherine smiled softly, as if she had foreseen this moment. Leo, oblivious to the adult complexities, simply celebrated. "Yes, we can go to the Aviation Museum in Mackay. There's a real Spitfire there." "That would be acceptable," Julia responded carefully, her eyes studying Michael with newly awakened caution. "I have some virtual meetings that I can't postpone," Michael explained. "But they can be done from here, and I'd like to get to know Leo's routine better." That afternoon, while Leo was at school, Michael finally had the conversation he had been avoiding with his mother. Sitting by the lake, away from the others' ears, Catherine confirmed what Amanda had hinted at. "Your father had another son, 3 years older than you," she revealed calmly, "with a company secretary, before we met. When she got pregnant, he fired her and denied any responsibility." "And how did you find out?" Michael asked, feeling a strange mixture of shock and inexplicable relief, as if a mystery he hadn't even known existed finally made sense. "When you were 12, we got a call from the hospital. A 15-year-old boy urgently needed a bone marrow transplant. He had a rare genetic condition that also appears in your father's family. The doctors had traced possible compatible donors. And he was my brother?" "Rodrigo." Catherine supplied the name softly. "He was my half-brother. Yes," she confirmed. "Your father denied it to the end, even when the tests confirmed it. He refused to help. He forbade you from being tested as a potential donor. Michael closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of this revelation. And what happened to him? He found another, less compatible donor. He survived, but with complications. He lives in Canada now. He's a university professor of engineering. Did you keep in touch? Discreetly. Your father never knew. Rodrigo contacted me when he was 20, wanting to know his story. He wasn't angry, just curious. He's an extraordinary man, Michael. You would like him. Michael felt as if the ground were opening up beneath his feet. His entire life he believed he was an only child, raised by an emotionally distant but at least physically present father. Now he discovered that he was part of a pattern, a cycle of abandonment he was perilously close to repeating. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, though he already intuited the answer. "Because you are at the same crossroads your father was. Twice he chose the path of least emotional involvement, with Rodrigo and then with you, in his own way. The question is, which choice will you make, Michael? You." That night, after helping Leo with his homework, a surprisingly rewarding experience, Michael found Julia alone on the porch, watching the stars. Without preamble, he said, "I want to be a part of his life. I don't know how. I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I want to try." Julia continued looking at the sky for a long moment before responding. "It's not a simple decision, Michael. It's not just about occasional visits or expensive birthday presents. It's about consistency, commitment, being present, even when it's inconvenient." "I know," he responded, approaching to look at the same sky she was contemplating. "I'm willing to learn, to change what's necessary." "Why?" The question was simple, but loaded with meaning. "Why now? After 5 years?" Michael considered several answers, some calculated to impress her, others to arouse sympathy. But in the end, he chose the simple, raw truth. "Because when I look at Leo, I see the person I could have been. If I had learned early that connection is more important than control. And because I don't want him to grow up thinking he wasn't important enough for me to change." Something on Julia's face softened almost imperceptibly. "It won't be easy for any of us. The things that truly matter rarely are," she responded, surprising herself with a wisdom she never knew she possessed. In the days that followed, Michael began the delicate process of integrating himself into Leo's life without disrupting the stability Julia had so carefully built. He participated in an open house at school, where Leo proudly introduced him as a family friend who builds huge buildings. He accompanied him to swimming practice, discovering that the boy had inherited not only his aptitude for numbers, but also his competitive spirit. Every new detail about his son was a treasure, from the way he wrinkled his nose when he was concentrating, to his inexplicable aversion to peas, or how he would hum softly while he drew. In video conferences with his executive team, Michael surprised everyone by announcing a 3-month partial leave of absence. He delegated responsibilities, reorganized projects, and, for the first time in his career, prioritized something above business. "The board is not happy," he commented to Amanda during one of the rare moments they spoke alone. "They think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis." "And are you?" she asked, her role as an investigator apparently never completely abandoned. "I'm having an identity crisis," he corrected with an ironic smile. "I'm discovering that the man I thought I was my entire adult life is only a fraction of the man I can be." On the morning of the 15th day, in Casimiro de Abreu, while having coffee on the now familiar porch, Leo asked the question everyone knew would eventually come. "You're my dad, aren't you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Julia froze, her cup halfway to her lips. Catherine and Carlos exchanged worried looks. Amanda discreetly got up and walked away, giving them privacy. Michael felt his heart race, but he kept his eyes fixed on the boys, eyes so similar to his own, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and wisdom beyond his years. "Yes," he responded simply. "I am your dad." Leo nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. "Why didn't you live with us?" The question, so direct and impossible to evade, demanded equal honesty. Michael looked briefly at Julia, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to navigate these delicate waters. "Because I made a mistake," he responded, carefully choosing his words. "A big mistake. When your mother and I met, I didn't know how to be the person she and you deserved. So, instead of learning, I ran away." "Like a coward?" Leo asked, the innocence of childhood allowing him a frankness no adult would dare. Michael felt the impact of the word, but he didn't look away. "Yes, like a coward, but I'm trying to be braver now." Leo considered this for a moment, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Grandpa Carlos says that being brave isn't not being afraid. It's doing the right thing, even when you're afraid." "Your grandpa is a wise man," Michael responded, feeling an unexpected gratitude for the old man who had helped raise his son in his absence. "Are you going to live with us now?" The next question made all the adults hold their breath. "No, honey," Julia intervened gently, "but your dad wants to be a part of your life, in a different way." "How?" Leo insisted, looking between the two of them. Michael took a deep breath before responding. "I want to get to know you, Leo. Learn about your planes, your friends, your favorite stories. I want to be there for your games and school presentations. I can't change the past, but we can build a future together if you want." Leo considered the proposal with a seriousness surprising for someone so young. Finally, he extended his small hand toward Michael. "We have a deal then, but you have to promise never to be a coward again." Michael took the little hand offered, feeling the enormous weight of the promise he was about to make. "I promise to try every day," he responded, knowing it was the only honest promise he could offer. 3 months later, Michael watched from the co-pilot seat as Julia piloted the small Cessna over the Green Mountains. In the back seat, Leo pointed enthusiastically at cloud formations and details of the landscape below, his animated voice amplified by the headset. Much had changed since that first interrupted flight. Michael had kept his word, reorganizing his life to include regular visits to Casimiro de Abreu. He rented a house in the city for the weekends, learned to cook Leo's favorite dishes poorly, and even started taking flying lessons. Not to compete with Julia, but to better understand the world that so fascinated his son. The Dawson corporations had survived the initial scandal, and after a press conference where Michael publicly acknowledged Leo's paternity, the shares had stabilized. Some conservative investors left. Others, surprisingly, saw the transparency as a positive sign of corporate maturity. "Look, Dad!" Leo's voice in the headset still caused a wave of emotion in Michael every time he called him that, a title he was slowly learning to earn. "That's our lake down there." "I see," he responded, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. "It looks even more beautiful from above." "Everything looks different when you change your perspective," Julia commented, gently adjusting the controls. "Ready to take over for a minute?" The offer surprised Michael. "Are you sure?" "We're at cruising altitude, clear sky, perfect conditions," she responded, that slight smile he was beginning to recognize again curving her lips. "Besides, I have good reflexes if you start taking us toward a mountain." With care, Michael placed his hands on the controls, feeling the subtle vibration of the aircraft, the literal responsibility for 3 lives in his hands. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "Are you flying, Dad?" Leo exclaimed, pride evident in his voice. "I am," Michael confirmed, concentrating intensely on keeping the plane level. "I am flying." But somehow, those simple words carried a much deeper meaning, not just about controlling an aircraft, but about finally taking control of his own life, his choices, his responsibilities. The open sky in front of him, infinite in its possibilities, seemed the perfect setting for this moment of clarity. Michael Dawson, who had spent his life building structures that touched the sky, was finally learning to fly. Not alone, as he had always believed was more efficient, but accompanied, guided, supported by people who, in different ways, formed the family he never knew he needed. "Where are we going now?" Leo asked, his voice full of expectation. Michael exchanged a look with Julia before responding, finding in her eyes not the love they had once shared, but something equally valuable: respect, mutual understanding, and the silent promise of a future where they would both put their son's needs above all else. "Wherever you want," Michael responded, meaning so much more than just the flight's destination. "The sky is the limit."